Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand.
And welcome. Today's deep dive. Well, it feels less like a typical analysis and more like someone just handed us the secret master map to reality.
Master map, I like that. We're talking about a text that claims to be a philosophical conclusion, right? A blueprint for everything, for movement, for becoming.
Precisely. It's outlining the mechanics of how the universe is organized, how it's structured, and I think most importantly, how we can potentially, escape that structure.
Okay, that sounds intense. It feels like we've been handed this ultimate architectural blueprint of existence, but it's full of jargon that, honestly, it seems designed to lock people out. So that's our mission today, isn't it?
Yeah.
To crack that conceptual code and find the drama inside these really complex ideas.
Exactly. The core tension that we're wrestling with here, the real existential itch this whole thing is trying to scratch.
Yeah.
It's how do human beings, and really all life,
Right.
how do we create stability and organization without becoming rigidly trapped by the very systems we build?
The classic problem. Wanting structure, but hating cages.
Yes.
You want to build a society that works, but you don't want the rules of that society to stop you from, from ever truly living or innovating. The text talks about accessing a life that's all the more intense, all the more powerful for being anorganic. That's a huge idea.
It is. Life that isn't constrained by its biological form. It's pure potential.
But how do you get there? How do you do that without just, falling into total useless chaos?
And that tension, that's the core conflict between total organization on one hand and total chaos on the other.
Yeah.
And to understand the escape route, we first have to understand the adversary.
The villain of the piece.
Or maybe a necessary adversary. The concept is stratification.
Stratification. Okay, so it's not just a fancy word for layers.
No, not at all. In this context, it's the universal process that takes dynamic, flowing, raw energy, what the text calls unformed matter, and it locks it into fixed, recognizable forms and codes.
It limits potential. It imposes boundaries.
Think of it like this. If existence began as this raw, molten energy, stratification is the cooling process. It's the folding and hardening that turns that flow into static navigable mountain ranges.
So it gives us the ground beneath our feet.
It does. But it also dictates where we can and cannot go.
And if we ignore this, we don't get the mechanics of how we get locked in.
Yeah.
Well, the stakes are huge.
Absolutely. We either stay trapped in these rigid systems that just strip life of its intensity.
Stagnation.
Yeah, total stagnation. Or, in trying to break out too fast, we fall into destructive chaos. It's basically an instruction manual for living dynamically without exploding.
I like that. A manual for not exploding. Okay, so what's our toolkit for this deep dive?
We've got 4 key ideas we really need to master. First, the strata, which is the fixed architecture.
Yeah.
Then assemblages, which are the operational units for movement. Then the rhizome, which is the actual path of escape.
And the last one.
And finally, the goal. The abstract machine and the body without organs, or BWO. That's the ultimate creative mechanism.
All right, let's try to unpack this with a framework, I was thinking. What if we imagine reality as a vast, distributed software system, like a massive online world?
Oh, that's a great analogy. Yeah, that works really well.
So in that framework, the strata would be the proprietary operating system, right? The OS, and the fixed hardware. The fundamental, non-negotiable rules of the game: physics, biology, law.
Exactly. And the assemblages then become the individual apps or, localized systems that carve out functional territories within that OS. They're the sites of interaction where you have some relative freedom.
And the rhizome. That's the network itself, the dynamic connections, the protocols that can actually bypass the hierarchy of the OS, allowing for flow and new kinds of communication.
Yeah.
So the abstract machine must be the algorithm of evolution. The core logic that decides if the whole system is moving toward more connection and vitality or toward rigid, destructive closure.
That's our blueprint.
Ready to construct this plane of consistency.
Let's begin.
Okay, let's lay the foundation. Strata. The source material gets pretty poetic. It calls them phenomena of thickening, accumulation, coagulation, folding on the body of the Earth.
Right. It's clearly not just a geological term. Structurally, strata are the universal organizers. They're an absolute necessity for organization to happen at all.
So they take this unformed matter and segment it.
They segment it into recognizable functional units. And they exist on every level. They're simultaneously molecular, like the tiniest chemical bonds, and molar, which are the big discernible structures, like, a continent or a social class.
And they function as The text says belts, pincers, or articulation.
which are all devices to hold things together in a fixed coded relationship.
Back to our software analogy, the strata are like the BIOS, the core code, the physical chips that impose stability.
That's a perfect way to put it. If everything was just pure molecular energy, nothing could function. The strata provide that necessary structure.
And the source material boils these down into 3 major strata that cover all of reality. We start at the bottom with the physicochemical strata.
This is the realm of physics and chemistry. So elements, geologic formations, stars, galaxies, and the laws that govern them. It's the material substratum for everything else. It defines the rules of gravity, electromagnetism, all of it.
And layered on top of that is the second one, the organic strata.
And this is where life as we know it organizes itself. Organisms, species, ecosystems. This layer imposes a very specific structure, the organism, onto that physicochemical base. It uses the rules of the lower strata, but it codes them differently to make life possible.
And then the third, our layer, the anthropomorphic or alloplastic strata.
Right. This is the human realm, and it's defined by our ability to impose abstract codes onto the world and onto ourselves. So technology, language, social organization, political structures, economic systems, all of that. It's probably the most complex and fastest expanding stratum.
What's really crucial here is that every single one of these strata, whether it's a rock or a legal constitution, it has the same basic architecture.
Yes. It consists of coded milieus and formed substances.
The environment it functions in, the milieu, and the stuff it's made of, the substance.
And here's where it gets a little tricky. The first real conceptual hurdle. The source says that the formal forms and the substantial modes aren't really distinct.
That does sound counterintuitive. I mean, we always think of form and substance as separate things.
Of course.
Like a law, the form is applied to a person, the substance. But the text argues that form and substance are just the abstract components of organization within that stratum. They're defined by the organization itself.
So the law and the person are both just aspects of the legal stratum's own organizational rules.
Okay. And this brings us to the engine that drives this whole thing. Helmslev's net and double articulation. This is the core mechanism of stratification, the double pincer.
We really need to spend some time here because it's foundational. Stratification is always a double articulation, and it's an articulation of content and an expression.
And this is the real distinction. Content and expression are distinct from each other, unlike form and substance.
That's right. They have a real distinction, a reciprocal presupposition, and, this is the key word, only isomorphy.
Isomorphy, meaning they share the same structure or form, but they aren't the same thing.
Exactly. One doesn't cause the other, and one doesn't represent the other, not in that classic signifier way.
Okay, so let's use an example. If we look at the organic stratum, the content might be the metabolic functions of a cell. And the expression is the genetic code, the DNA.
Yeah. And they're structured in parallel. They're isomorphic. But the sequence of DNA doesn't cause the metabolism. It presupposes it, and vice versa. They're two distinct aspects of the same articulation. They run side by side, like two parallel tracks defining what an organism is.
And the difference between the 3 big strata, physicochemical, organic, anthropomorphic, that's determined by how content and expression are distributed along those 2 tracks.
Exactly. The distribution is different.
Can you give an example of that difference?
Well, the source talks about the linearization of expression on the organic stratum. Think about a DNA sequence. It's a clear, linear code that defines biological function. It's powerful, but it's also a restricted way of articulating things. The content, which is the function, the expression, the code, they map very directly onto each other.
But on the anthropomorphic strata, so language, culture, law, we see superlinearity.
Yes. Human expression is just far more complex. It's layered. It's multidimensional. A single word can carry a density of meaning and context and history that makes it fundamentally different from the one-to-one coding of a DNA sequence.
And that difference in distribution is why the interplay between the large-scale molar forces and the microscale molecular forces creates such radically different structures.
Yeah.
Now, for the paradox, if strata are so fixed, encoded, and organized, how can the text also claim they are extremely mobile?
Because organization isn't static. It's a constant process of organizing. So while a stratum is fixed internally by its codes, it's highly dynamic externally in how it relates to the other strata.
Okay, so one stratum can act as the substratum for another. The organic stratum, for example, relies completely on the fixed physicochemical laws of chemistry to function.
And when these strata interact or even collide, you get what are called interstratic phenomena. These are transcodings, passages between different milieus, intermixings. The source calls these movements rhythms, but they are still fundamentally acts of stratification.
Every time you invent a new technology, you're performing a rhythm. You're transposing physicochemical rules into an anthropomorphic code.
Right. And these rhythms are a continual, renewed creation of the world from chaos. It's this necessary, constant process of imposing order.
Which is why the strata constitute the judgment of God.
It's a powerful phrase. It highlights the ultimate authority and the severity of the strata. They are the conditions that make existence possible, but they're also the very source of our restriction.
And that sets up the stakes perfectly. If the strata are the rule set, then the goal of this whole philosophical project is to reach the plane of consistency or anorganic life, which is the operational area outside those rigid rules.
But there's a huge warning that comes with that goal.
The concrete rules of caution.
Yes, and this is maybe the most practical, vital lesson in the whole thing. The space outside the strata, the metastrata, it's pure potential, sure, but it's also pure chaos. The unformed matter and non-organic life you're seeking can very easily just turn into the void and immediate destruction.
So the warning is twofold. Any attempt at destratification, going beyond the organism, plunging into a becoming, you have to be extremely cautious because a too sudden attempt can be either suicidal or it can turn cancerous.
Let's break those two down because they're critical. Suicidal means falling into the void. This is the classic story of the artist who tries to break all the boundaries, shatters their own organizing ego, and just descends into psychosis or self-destruction.
They achieved destratification, but they couldn't recompose themselves on the plane of consistency.
They had nowhere to land. And the cancerous path is maybe even more insidious. This is when, in trying to escape rigidity, you actually lock yourself back into the strata, but in a way that is even more rigid. You lose all your degrees of freedom and mobility.
The example of a cult leader comes to mind, someone who promises spiritual freedom, destratification, but then immediately imposes a much smaller, tighter set of rules and codes and rituals than society ever did.
That's a perfect example. They trade the complexity of the organic stratum, life, for the extreme monotonous rigidity of this artificially reinforced narrow structure. It's a self-inflicted totalizing system. You wanted freedom, but you ended up in a death trap.
It's like saying, I'm tired of the skyscraper, the strata, so I'll just jump out the window to be free.
Right. You escape the building, but you don't reach the ground. You just meet destruction.
So the escape has to be tactical. It has to be step by step. You have to use these operational units that can bridge the gap between the fixed structure and the pure flow.
Right. Since strata are the fixed organizational structures, the operating system, we need an operational unit for movement within them. And that brings us to assemblages.
Assemblages are where change actually begins. They're produced in the strata, but they start to operate in these zones where the milieus become decoded.
They are the localized app, the tactical unit, where we can start to carve out some relative autonomy from the rigidity of the OS.
And the first concrete rule for analyzing any assemblage is figuring out its territoriality.
Every assemblage is fundamentally territorial. It begins by extracting a territory from the larger milieus.
And this isn't just about drawing a line on a map.
No, it's about staking a conceptual and a pragmatic claim. The source uses the example of Beckett's characters, staking out their territory on a bench or in the trash can. That tiny space becomes their entire world, and it's defined by their actions and the properties they assign to the decoded fragments they gather there.
So the territory is made from decoded fragments. These are pieces of the strata ideas, objects, routines that are borrowed, but then they assume a specific value as properties or functional parts within that assemblage.
It's a patch of relative stability, and it's defined by the fragments it is claimed and organized for its own purposes.
So an assemblage is defined by this tetravalent assemblage model. Two inseparable axes. Let's start with the first one, content and expression. How is this different from how they worked in the strata?
Oh, in the strata, content and expression were related by isomorphy. They were parallel but kind of static. In the assemblage, their distinction becomes highly active, very communicative. Expression becomes a semiotic system, a regime of signs. So what is said, what is written, what is signaled.
And content.
Content becomes a pragmatic system. It deals with actions, passions, material effects, what is done or what happens to the body.
The classic philosophical split between word and deed.
Exactly. And the new critical relationship that emerges here is that expressions communicate incorporeal transformations that are then attributed to the bodies, to the contents.
Incorporeal transformations. Okay, that's a powerful concept. Give us a concrete example.
Think of a judge in a courtroom declaring a defendant guilty. The judge's expression, the statement, the word, it doesn't physically alter the defendant's body, the content,
Right.
but it transforms their incorporeal status. They go from being a free citizen to being a convict. The transformation is real, it's material in its consequences, but the expression itself is purely semiotic.
Huh.
That autonomous zone of transformation is what makes the assemblage so dynamic.
Yeah, the statement, the sign, the expression, it doesn't just describe the content. It actively transforms its status within the territory of the assemblage.
Precisely. But the second axis is what defines the assemblage's potential for escape. Territoriality and deterritorialization.
Yeah.
Territoriality is the stable, organizing part, but lines of deterritorialization are the movements that cut across it and carry it away.
This is it. This is the critical line of flight out of the local cage.
That line of flight opens the assemblage onto what the text calls eccentric, immemorial, or yet-to-come land. And if you follow these lines of escape, the whole content-expression distinction starts to vanish. You're just left with unformed matters, destratified forces, and pure functions.
Which is why the assemblage is a tetravalent. We have to look at all four aspects: content, expression, territory, and the tendency to deterritorialize. Let's focus on that line of flight itself. Deterritorialization, or D, the movement by which one leaves the territory. But the text immediately says it's never that simple.
No. The most common form is what's called negative D. This is when your movement away from the territory is immediately overlaid by a compensatory reterritorialization.
So the line of flight gets blocked. Or worse, it gets used to reinforce the system you were trying to escape.
Exactly, and I think this is incredibly relatable. The source points out that anything can serve as a reterritorialization. An object, a system, a book, property, work, money.
It's the systemic failure of escape.
It is. Think about the entrepreneur who starts a radically new, decentralized, collaborative company. That's D. But then they immediately reterritorialize on stock options, quarterly earnings reports, and rigid HR policies.
Right.
They attempted an escape, but the movement was instantly captured and used to reinforce traditional corporate structure.
I feel like I've seen that happen a dozen times. The movement is just enough to make you feel like you've changed, but really it just strengthens the existing strata. The source also says the state apparatus does this. It mobilizes people and resources, that's a D, but it immediately reterritorializes on property and work, arresting the free movement.
And that state mechanism ensures that all that intense, liberated energy from mobilization gets channeled right back into maintaining the existing stratified system.
So then there's the next step up, the movement that actually works, sort of. Relative positive D.
Here, D actually prevails over the reterritorializations. The movement is forward, the escape is successful, but it's still relative. And that's because the line of flight is segmented. It's divided into these successive proceedings, or it sinks into what are called black holes.
Black holes sounds like points of failure or stagnation that just swallow all the momentum.
They are. The source uses the regime of subjective signs, our consciousness, our passions, as an example of relative positive D. You're moving toward freedom, you're escaping rigidity, but your movement is stop and start. It's subject to segmentation, to self-doubt, to localized catastrophe.
So you haven't yet achieved that continuous fluid movement of absolute escape.
Not yet. That's what we need to get to the plane of consistency.
Okay, but before we get to the destination, we have to clarify the role of the Earth. D is about leaving the localized territory, so it seems like the Earth would be the opposite of D, but the text says it's correlate.
The distinction is between the territory, the local rigid organization, and the Earth, which is the deterritorialized cosmic material force. The Earth, in this context, is the glacial, it's the cosmos, it's this intense focal point of the natal existing outside the segmented territory.
So when we deterritorialize, we're not abandoning our physical existence.
Well,
We're shedding the artificial local organization, the territory, and reconnecting with the raw cosmic material of the Earth. The planet seen as pure material intensity.
exactly. The Earth is deterritorialization par excellence. It's the source of all unformed matter and potential. So D can be called the creator of a new Earth, a new universe, because the movement is fundamentally creative. It connects us back to the planet's raw, intense potential by shedding the confines of the local assemblage. Okay, so we've established the fixed reality of the strata and the unit of relative action, the assemblages. Now we need the actual continuous path of escape. This is what takes us beyond the segmented lines of relative D and into the rhizome. His concept defines the path toward true liberation.
The rhizome, it's the philosophical opposite of the tree, right? The tree structure is what we use intuitively to organize things. Hierarchical, linear, always leading back to a single root.
Which sounds exactly like the strata. That's the molar or arborescent line. These lines are subordinated to a point. They form contours. They create what's called striated space.
Striated space, countable multiplicities subordinated to the one, bureaucracy, taxonomy, traditional command structures.
Yes. Segmentary, circular, binary. In contrast, you have the molecular or rhizome lines, which are the essence of smooth space. Here, the diagonal frees itself. The line passes between things, between points. It doesn't form a contour. It's fundamentally non-hierarchical. It belongs to a smooth space. Think of the open sea, the steppe, the desert. These are spaces defined by flow and vector, not by fixed measurement or boundaries.
And the multiplicities they create are no longer subordinated to the one. They're anomalous and nomadic multiplicities. Masses or packs, not classes. Transformational, fuzzy, defined by immediate connection, not lineage.
And the source gives us a really fascinating, if challenging, idea of how the rhizome manifests. Pathologically, it's expressed by psychosis and schizophrenia. Practically, it's utilized by sorcery.
Whoa, okay, let's pause there. What does it mean that psychosis expresses the rhizome pathologically?
Well, psychosis in this context is the total break from the molar, striated lines of common reality, the boundaries between self and world, between concept and reality. They dissolve. The patient is swimming in the non-hierarchical, intense flow of the rhizome, but they don't have the capacity to stabilize or recompose themselves.
They've achieved suicidal destratification.
Exactly.
And sorcery. That sounds like a pretty radical interpretation.
It is. Sorcery in this framework isn't necessarily ritual magic. It's a technique for non-molar thinking. It's the practical application of the rhizome, connecting things based on anomalous association and immediate functional effects, bypassing codified science or taxonomy. You're operating purely on flow and intensity, allowing that diagonal connection to free itself from the established hierarchy.
Which really emphasizes the constant tension. Arborification, the tree, and the rhizome, the network, are immanent to each other. They're constantly trying to escape or resegment one another.
You can't have one without the other trying to take over. We're always trying to striate smooth, space-like, putting borders on the sea, and smooth, striated, space-like, inventing new communication protocols that bypass old hierarchies.
And this tension defines us. We're composed of 3 lines of life, and each one has its own dangers. The first, the safest, but also the most stagnant, are the segmented lines.
These are the molar arborescent lines that impose homogeneous striated space on us. Our career paths, our mortgages, our schedules. Their danger is rigidity and stagnation.
Second, the molecular lines.
These are the rhizome lines, and they're already ferrying micro black holes. They're highly dynamic, that moment of artistic insight, your radical side project, but they're volatile. They risk immediate collapse into localized catastrophe or confusion.
And third, the most important one for escape, are the lines of flight.
These are the lines that carry us away, that open up absolute D. But their inherent risk is that they can turn into a line of death or destruction, pure and simple. And the text gives the really powerful example of fascism.
Why is fascism considered a line of death that comes from a line of flight?
Because fascism harnesses that intense deterritorializing energy, the desire to escape existing boundaries, class structures, segmented lives, but it immediately converts that energy into a suicidal, totalizing system. The line of flight is stopped, it's blocked, and is forced into a singular destructive trajectory that reduces all complexity to one terrifying, rigid mold.
It sought absolute D, but delivered absolute destruction.
Exactly. The intensity of the creative escape is precisely what makes it so dangerous if it's misdirected toward homogenization.
So the only way to navigate these risks is to aim for the true destination, the plane of consistency or composition.
And this plane is the total inverse of the plane of organization and development. Organization deals with form and substance, with what is. The plane of consistency deals with what is becoming.
And what replaces form and substance on this new plane?
The plane of consistency knows nothing of form and substance. Instead, it consists of these abstract yet very real relations of speed and slowness between unformed elements, and compositions of corresponding intensive effects. These relations are described as longitude and latitude.
So it's a map of intensity, not structure. Longitude and latitude define a body not by its fixed physical location, but by its capacity for movement and change, its ability to affect and be affected.
Precisely. It's a plane of pure becoming. And the elements that populate this plane are called hypsides.
Okay, this is one of those concepts that trips everyone up. Can you explain a Hypside simply?
A hypside is a mode of individuation that doesn't proceed by form or by subject. They are events, incorporeal transformations, vague yet rigorous nomadic essences. They have neither culmination nor subject. Think of the newness of a specific summer day, or the exact singularity of a battle or a storm or a unique moment of realization.
So it's the event itself, the temporal and affective configuration, not the subject experiencing it or the fixed object contained within it.
Exactly. They are pure events and connections, existing in the middle, by the middle, opposing all planes of principle or finality. The philosophical surveyors of this plane are the thinkers who sought consistency and consolidation, never unification people. People like Spinoza, Hölderlin, Kleist, Nietzsche.
And the central figure inscribed on this plane of consistency is the body without organs, BWO. If the strata represent the fixed organism, the structure we're born into, then the BWO sounds like the necessary counterfigure, the capacity to continually dissolve and recompose outside of a predetermined form.
The BWO is the embodiment of this non-organic life. It is powerful non-organic life that actively escapes the strata, cuts across assemblages, and draws that abstract line without contour. It comes into play in individuation by Hypside, in the smoothing of space and the production of intensities. It's the destination we are trying to construct by managing our lines of flight.
So the question isn't how to destroy the organism, but how to make sure your organism never becomes a rigid, segmented, totalizing body.
It is the composer and the composed all at once. The key challenge is how the parts of the plane interconnect and what order of transformation is retained. And this leads us to the ultimate safeguard, the selective concrete rule. This is the ethical guideline for all destratification.
This is what separates creation from chaos or cancer.
Yes. The plane of consistency provides the means of eliminating the threats, the emptying and cancerous bodies, and the lines of death. And the rule is quantitative and functional.
Okay.
It says, what is retained and preserved, therefore created. What consists is only that which increases the number of connections at each level of division or composition, thus in descending as well as ascending order.
Wow, that's the core takeaway. True positive creative movement is measured not by destruction or rigid organization, but by how many new connections you create across all scales, molecular and molar. If your line of flight increases connection, it's vital. If it leads to closure, segmentation, or reduction of connections, it's cancerous or suicidal.
We have the goal, the BWR on the plane of consistency, and we have the path, the rhizome and lines of flight. Now we need the operating system that makes the whole process happen, the abstract machine.
The term abstract machine is where I think a lot of people get lost. It sounds like a philosophical concept totally divorced from reality, but the text insists it's the opposite. It is not a Platonic idea. It's not transcendent, universal, or eternal.
No, it's intensely singular and immanent. Abstract machines operate within concrete assemblages. They are defined specifically by the cutting edges of decoding and deterritorialization. They are the mechanisms, the functional blueprints that force a territorial assemblage to open onto other types of assemblages, onto the molecular, or even onto cosmic potential.
And this is why they're called abstract, because they lack the fixed form and substance that define the strata and molar organization. They consist of unformed matters and nonformal functions.
And this composite of matters and functions is known as the phylum and diagram. These are the dual forces of the abstract machine.
Okay, let's break down the phylum.
The phylum is the unformed matter. And this is not dead, brute matter. It's a matter movement that bears singularities and atidius. Think of it as an itinerant technological lineage, the history of a material's potential. In metalworking, the phylum is the raw potential of the ore, the history of metallurgy, the specific properties of conductivity and resistance inherent in the material flow itself.
It's the inherent resistance and potential in the stuff of the world.
Exactly. And the diagram is the nonformal function. It's not a fixed language or a set of instructions, but an expressivity movement that bears differential equations or tensors.
Tensors being abstract concepts like speed, delay, induction, the forces that act upon the matter.
Precisely. It's the mathematical functional principle of transformation. When a composer like Bach creates a new fugue structure, that structure is a diagram. It's a non-linguistic expression bearing a functional tensor that dictates specific relations of speed and slowness. It writes on the same level as the real, unformed matter of musical pitch and rhythm.
What I find so mind-bending is the assertion that these machines are abstract because they lack form, yet they're also real and actual, and they're dated and named.
Because they are singularities that effectuate reality. That's why we have the Einstein abstract machine, the Weberian abstract machine, Galileo, Bach, Beethoven. These names don't refer to the subjective people, but to the precise, singular machines they realized. The profound, dated shift in the rules of connection and variation that they introduced into the world.
Einstein didn't just have an idea, he effectuated a new abstract machine of physics.
Yes.
Now let's get to the crucial real-world application of this logic. The distinction between the war machine and the state apparatus. This is where the political stakes become immediately clear.
The text notes that these two are distinct in nature, and they're quantifiable by their coefficients relating to the abstract machine.
The intuitive reading is that the state apparatus is the organizing force, which is good, and the war machine is the violent destructive force, which is bad. But here, the roles seem to be philosophically reversed, at least relative to the creative abstract machine.
They are fundamentally reversed in terms of deterritorialization and connection. The war machine, and this includes writing, music, nomad art, radical scientific invention, is actually closer to the living abstract machine.
Why?
Because it operates by opening and multiplying connections, by drawing a plane of consistency. It possesses a profound power of metamorphosis. It functions rhizomatically, generating smooth space.
So the war machine is a term for the nomadic, creative force that constantly restructures things. But the text adds that the war machine does not in itself have war for its object.
And that is the crucial clarification. It's a machine of metamorphosis and creation. It only adopts war as its object when it gets appropriated and distorted by the state apparatus. This appropriation is the systemic sabotage of the creative, deterritorializing machine.
Wait, if the war machine is creation, how do we distinguish its power of metamorphosis from just pure, aimless chaos? Isn't chaos also full of metamorphosis?
That's the critical difference, and it comes right back to the selective concrete rule. The chaos of a suicidal line of flight reduces connections. The metamorphosis of the abstract machine multiplies them. The war machine, in its pure form, is constantly establishing new relations of speed and slowness, enabling more complexity. It only turns destructive when the state takes that pure movement and applies its instruments of closure.
How does the state apparatus do that? What are those specific mechanisms of closure?
The state apparatus systematically divests the war machine of its transformative power, and it replaces those creative, multiplying connections with 4 specific mechanisms of totalization.
Sure.
First, axiomatics. These are conjunctions that cause blockages. Second, stratometers, organizations that form rigid strata. Third, segmentometers, reterritorializations that form black holes. And fourth, deliometers, conversions into lines of death.
Okay, let's make those real. What is an axiomatic machine in action?
Axiomatics are the system's attempts to impose total coherence and standardization, and that causes blockages to flow. Imagine a massive bureaucratic organization that has to cut its budget. Instead of letting various departments innovate solutions, the war machine, it imposes a blanket 10% cut across the board, regardless of need or consequence. That standardization is the axiomatic machine, and it causes immediate functional blockage.
And a stratometer.
That's the organization of new, rigid strata. Think of a university that introduces new, excessively layered managerial structures. Vice provosts over associate provosts over directors over coordinators. The goal is organization, but the result is a thickening of the structure that makes communication and innovation almost impossible. The stratometer is hardening the organizational structure.
Then the segmentometer, which creates black holes.
This is the machine of reterritorialization that captures the line of flight. Think of a political party that initially harnesses genuine grassroots energy, that's D, but immediately converts that passion into fundraising targets, mandatory talking points, and loyalty pledges. That segmented, closed, circular system swallows the creative energy. It turns the movement into a black hole of identity and conformity.
And finally, the terrifying deliometers conversions into lines of death.
This is the ultimate reduction, where any variation or deviation is pathologized and purged. Historically, this is censorship, ideological purges, or, today, the complete mapping and tracking of all citizen data into a single system designed to eliminate anomalous behavior. It transforms the potential for novelty into a target for destruction.
That is a powerful vocabulary for institutional closure. The state takes the creative energy of the war machine and just turns it into a system for counting segments and blocking connections.
Right. So the selection process for all reality is their ability to increase connections. What the text calls schizoanalysis is a quantitative analysis of how close or far an assemblage is from the presumably pure abstract machine. How many axiomatics and deleometers does it use versus how many new connections does it generate?
And to complete the picture, the text defines three types of abstract machines that are constantly interacting in reality.
We have to account for the necessity of order versus the impulse for control.
So first are the machines of consistency.
These are the singular mutant machines with multiplied connections. The creative, living machine, the pure war machine. They're focused on becoming.
Second, the machines of stratification.
These machines surround the plane of consistency. They form the necessary areas of thickening, coagulation, the belts. They're the necessary organizer. They provide structure to prevent chaos.
And third, the most dangerous ones, axiomatic or overcoding machines.
These machines perform totalizations, homogenizations, and conjunctions of closure. They actively overcode existing systems. An order word machine overcodes language. A faciality machine overcodes the body. A machine of enslavement axiomatizes the earth.
So the dynamic of reality is this creative machine of consistency constantly fighting against the necessary organizing machine of stratification,
Right.
while being aggressively countered by the homogenizing destructive machine of overcoding. It's an intricate, ongoing struggle happening across every domain: political, economic, scientific, artistic.
So we've traced a really complex intellectual journey here. We started with the fixed, molar rules, the strata, the necessary judgment of God that risked becoming these rigid cages.
Right. And then we identified the units of action, the assemblages, which staked out territories and attempted a relative escape through deterritorialization, or D.
And from there, we identified the path, the rhizome, and the plane of consistency, where true individuation is achieved through continuous variation and connection, the body without organs, the BWO.
And finally, we isolated the operating system that generates all of this, the abstract machine. When it's fully realized, it produces radical, creative change by multiplying connections. But when it's co-opted by the state apparatus, it's turned into a deadly mechanism of closure axiomatics, deleometers.
Let's consolidate this with the master analogy we started with. Reality is a massive, distributed software network. The strata are the fixed proprietary OS. The assemblages are individual applications. Deterritorialization is the act of creating an open-source modification that forces that proprietary code to adapt.
But the danger is in the type of modification. Negative D is when the modification is immediately absorbed and reproprietarized by the OS, which just reinforces its control. And the abstract machine is the underlying functional logic, the algorithm of evolution that dictates whether the system creates more connections, the machines of consistency, or creates blockages and closures, the axiomatic machines.
And the final implication of this entire journey is the distinction between the absolute positive D and what's called the limitative absolute. The absolute positive D is the creation of a new Earth, consolidated and connected with the cosmos, following the lines of creation. This is the ultimate continuous flow of vital non-organic life.
And that's opposed by the limitative absolute, where the Earth is girded, encompassed, overcoded, conjugated as the object of a mortuary and suicidal organization surrounding it on all sides.
Let's try to translate that philosophical language into something immediately relevant. The fight between absolute positive D and the limitative absolute is the difference between a global communication system that constantly invents new, decentralized forms of collaboration and exchange, versus one where every single connection, every piece of data is mapped, tracked, and monetized back into one single, inescapable mega platform that just reinforces its own control. That latter one is the mortuary organization.
And we have to remember that the path to absolute D necessarily goes through relative D. You can't just leap into the absolute. You have to construct it, piece by piece, guided by that core rule. Always increase the number of connections.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward. It's based on the nature of the abstract machine and continuous variation. In absolute D, both content, the unformed matter, the intensities and expression, the nonformal functions, the tensors, are affected by continuous variation. The text says that both the deterritorializing element and the deterritorialized element constantly take turns leading one another across the plane of consistency.
What does that mean for your own life? That the elements of creation and destruction are constantly swapping roles as the primary driver of change? Are you, the learner, the deterritorializing force, the one introducing new functions and cutting through rigid content?
Or are you the deterritorialized content, the matter being swept along by a non-formal function for better or for worse?
Are the molar, molecular, and flight lines that make up your existence tending toward creation, connection, and multiplication? Or are they sinking into black holes and becoming rigid, destructive segments? This map isn't just a philosophy, it's an instruction manual for the lines you choose to draw across your own existence. So think about your lines.
We hope this deep dive has given you the conceptual tools you need to survey and construct a new plane of consistency. Until next time.